You're listening to the Alpha's Love Stories romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1. The last silence. The air in the clearing was thick, so thick with pine and dread I could barely breathe. 5 years. 5 long years of standing here, a statue of hope and shame, praying for my name to be called, and for 5 years only silence. Tonight was the final ceremony, my last chance. In our world, a she-wolf without a mate is nothing, a ghost. A stain on her family's honor. I clenched my hands so tightly my nails bit into my palms. My heart was a wild, frantic bird trying to escape the cage of my ribs. Don't hope, Ilara, don't you dare hope. Hope is a knife that has cut you 4 times before. Alpha Brighton stood upon the great stone, his voice a low thunder that shook the very leaves. One by one he called the unmated males. Each stepped forward, his eyes scanning the crowd of waiting she-wolves. A name would ring out, a joyful gasp. A new pair formed. Every smile was a shard of glass in my soul. I fixed my gaze on the gnarled roots of the old willow, counting the cracks in the bark. I could feel my family behind me. My father's rigid, disapproving silence. My mother's whispered prayers, not for my happiness, no, for the family's reputation. The shame was a living creature, coiled cold and heavy in my stomach. Finally, the last name, Kale, a strong hunter with kind eyes, he stepped forward. His gaze swept over us, and for one terrifying, glorious heartbeat, it stopped on me. It lingered, that treacherous thing. Hope unfurled its broken wings inside my chest. Please, my soul screamed silently to the moon. Not again, not this time. Kale's eyes moved on. They settled on Lyra, a beautiful she-wolf with sunshine in her smile. Lyra, he called, his voice sure and strong. The pack erupted in cheers, and then there was only me. Alpha Brighton's gaze swept the clearing, his mouth a grim line. Ilara, he announced, his voice flat, empty. A mere formality. He waited. The pack waited. The very forest seemed to hold its breath. No one stepped forward. No one spoke. The cheers had died, replaced by a silence so profound, so heavy, it pressed on me from all sides. It was colder than winter's first frost. This was the 5th silence, the final one. It was the sound of my worth being measured and found utterly, completely lacking. I couldn't help it. My eyes flickered to my family. My father, Ronan, refused to look at me, his jaw clenched like stone. My mother, Anya, simply closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. That tear wasn't for me, it was for them. Their verdict was in this crushing quiet. I was worthless. But as I stood there drowning in that ocean of silence, something new sparked in the ashes of my despair. A tiny, defiant ember of anger. They wanted me to break, to crumble. Fine, let them watch. I lifted my chin. I straightened my spine, forcing my trembling legs to hold. I would not cry here, not in front of them. The walk back to the dens was a gauntlet of whispers and averted eyes. They parted for me as if my failure were a plague. And behind me, the silence of my family was the loudest sound of all. It was a door slamming shut. Forever, later in the cold darkness of my small alcove, I packed a single, worn satchel. My hands were steady. The numbness had set in, a merciful ice. I took only what was truly mine, a change of clothes, a water skin, my grandfather's hunting knife. I left behind a small carved fox he had given me, a relic from a time when I believed I was loved. The hunk of bread and dried venison felt like a pardon for a crime I didn't commit. My father's final words echoed in the stone walls, "Be gone by sunrise, you are no daughter of mine." he would not have the satisfaction of watching me leave. I would be a ghost vanishing into the night from which I should have never come. As I slipped past the leather door flap, the moon was my only witness. I didn't look back. Looking back was for people who had something to return to. I had nothing. Only the dark, unforgiving woods ahead. I ran, not as a wolf, but as a girl fueled by a fury so cold it burned. I plunged into the deep forest, branches clawing at my skin like accusing fingers, welcoming me into a world that promised only danger or oblivion. Little did I know the silence had not ended my story. It had merely turned the page to a chapter written in shadow and blood, for the wilderness was not empty, and what waited for me in its heart was far more terrifying than any pack's rejection. Chapter 2, A Cage of Blood and Stone. I ran until my lungs screamed for mercy, until the burn in my legs eclipsed the ache in my heart. The familiar sense of my pack's territory faded, replaced by the raw, untamed perfume of deep wilderness, damp earth, rotting leaves, and something else, something sharp and wild. Dawn was a pale suggestion through the thick canopy when I finally collapsed, my back against the rough bark of an ancient oak. The adrenaline was gone, in its place a hollow, yawning emptiness that threatened to swallow me whole. I was alone, truly, utterly alone, no pack, no family, no future. I fumbled for the bread in my satchel. It was dry and tasteless, but I forced it down. Survival. That was the only thought left. As I chewed, the tears finally came. Silent, hot, and shameful, even here with no one to see. They were tears for the girl I was, for the life that was stolen, for the terrifying emptiness of tomorrow. I let them fall. What did it matter now? Then the scent hit me. It was faint at first, a whisper on the wind, not pine, not earth. This was different. It smelled of lightning-charged air after a storm of cold, ancient stone, and of a raw, overwhelming power that made the tiny hairs on my neck stand straight up. My wolf, dormant, cowed, a creature of shame for so long, stirred deep within my soul. It wasn't a welcome stir. It was a primal tremor of terror. This was not the scent of a silver-fanged wolf. This was something other. Fear, clean and sharp, sliced through my despair. I scrambled to my feet, my hand flying to the hilt of my knife. The feeling of being watched was a physical weight on my skin. My eyes darted between the thick trunks, the dense ferns. Nothing moved, but the scent grew stronger, flooding my senses until I could taste it, ozone and dominance. And then I saw it, a shadow within the shadows. A wolf, but no wolf I had ever seen, even in my grandfather's most fearsome tales. It was colossal, its fur the pure, absolute black of a moonless night. It stood perfectly still, a statue carved from darkness, only its eyes visible, two orbs of burning, molten gold. They were fixed on me with an intelligence that was not animal. It was calculating, assessing. And in those depths I did not see the hunger of a predator. I saw the cold, terrifying gleam of possession. My breath hitched in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to shift, to flee, but my body was frozen, locked in place by the sheer, monumental weight of its presence. This was an apex predator, a king, and I was an intruder in his realm. It moved, one silent, fluid step, then another. It began to circle me, a slow, deliberate dance of muscle and shadow. The air vibrated with its power. I could only stand there, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. It stopped directly in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from its massive body. It lowered its head, that terrifying muzzle inches from my face. It inhaled deeply, a sound that rumbled through the ground. It was learning me, claiming my scent. Then the air shimmered. It was a distortion, a ripple of reality. The form of the wolf dissolved, melting away like smoke, and in its place stood a man. He was taller, broader than any man in my pack, with shaggy black hair that fell to his shoulders and skin touched by the sun and wind. He wore simple, dark leathers, but his face, his eyes, they were the same burning gold. They held me captive, stripping away every pretense, every defense. I found my voice, a ragged, broken thing. "Who? What are you? What do you want from me?" He took one final step, closing the last distance between us. He didn't answer at first. He simply reached out, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as they brushed a tangled strand of hair from my tear-streaked face. The touch was electric, a jolt that raced straight to my core. I flinched, but he didn't pull away. "I am Kieran," he said, and his voice was a low, rumbling baritone that vibrated in my very bones. "Alpha of the Shadow Ridge Pack." His thumb stroked my cheek once, a gesture of terrifying certainty. "And you, lost little wolf, are the one I have been waiting for." His words didn't make sense. They couldn't. "Waiting for? No, you're mistaken. I'm nobody. I'm unclaimed. You are mine," he stated, and the finality in those two words was more absolute than any alpha's decree, any pack law. The gold in his eyes darkened, not with anger, but with an unshakable resolve that turned my blood to ice. "The moon goddess did not bring you here by accident. Your path led to my territory. Your heart called to mine. The silence of your old pack was not your end, it was your beginning with me." He offered his hand, not to grab, but to take. It was a command disguised as an invitation. The world seemed to tilt. The safe, known path was behind me, a path of shame and exile. Before me was this terrifying alpha, a kingdom of shadows, and a claim that felt less like a rescue and more like a sentence to a different kind of prison. But in his eyes, for the first time in 5 long years, someone looked at me and saw something. Not a ghost, not a stain, something worth claiming. Trembling, utterly defeated, I looked from his extended hand back into those golden, waiting eyes. I had no strength left to fight. No hope left to defy. With a shuddering breath that felt like the last of my old life leaving my body, I placed my small, cold hand into his large, warm one. The decision was made. But as he turned, leading me deeper into the unknown woods, a chilling thought whispered in the back of my mind. What if the monster I was running from was the one holding my hand, and what terrible price would this new beginning demand? The forest swallowed us whole, and the door to my past slammed shut with a final, echoing thud. Chapter 3, The Fortress of Shadows. The journey was a silent, exhausting blur. Kieran moved through the forest with a predatory grace that left no trail, his long strides eating up the ground. I stumbled behind him, my legs like lead, my mind reeling. The world changed around us. The trees grew taller, darker, their branches twisted into ominous shapes. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of pine and something metallic like wet stone. This was not the gentle, managed woodland of Silverfang territory. This was a primal, ancient place, a place of teeth and claws. He never spoke, he never looked back. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me that he was aware of my every ragged breath, every faltering step. When I tripped over a hidden root, scraping my palm raw, he paused. He didn't offer help. He simply waited, a statue of patience, until I pushed myself up and continued. It was a test. Everything felt like a test. As dusk began to paint the sky in shades of violet and deep blue, we crested a steep, rocky ridge. And there, below us in a valley carved from the mountain's very heart, lay my new prison or my new home. My breath caught. Shadow Ridge Keep was not a village, it was a fortress. A formidable wall of sharpened, blackened timber, twice the height of any man, encircled the settlement. Watchtowers, like skeletal fingers, clawed at the darkening sky. A single, heavily fortified gate was the only break in its grim defense. Inside, the dwellings weren't cozy dens, they were structures built into the living rock of the cliff face, their entrances dark, yawning mouths. Smoke curled from hidden vents, the only sign of life in that stony visage. This was a place built not for community, but for siege. For survival against a world that wanted it gone. A cold dread, deeper than any I felt during the claiming ceremony, settled in my stomach. What kind of pack lived here? As we approached the gate, two guards materialized from the shadows. They were massive, scarred, their eyes holding a flat, dangerous gleam. They looked at Kieran with a reverence that bordered on fear. "Alpha," one grunted, his voice like grinding stones. They didn't even glance at me. The great gate swung inward with a groan that spoke of immense weight and disuse. Stepping inside was like entering another world. The central yard was a hard-packed arena of dirt and stone, lit by torches that cast flickering, dancing shadows, and there were wolves everywhere. They were bigger, rougher than any I'd known. Men and women alike bore the marks of violence, scars, notched ears, eyes that had seen too much. They stopped what they were doing, sharpening blades, tending hides, sparring in brutal, efficient bouts, and turned, every single one of them. A sea of hostile, curious, and wary faces fixed on me. The silence that fell was absolute and suffocating. I felt like a newborn fawn dropped into a pit of wolves. Instinctively, I shrunk closer to Kieran's side, the heat from his body the only anchor in that chilling sea of stares. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He was almost as tall as Kieran, with a broad chest and a beard streaked with silver. His eyes, a calm and intelligent gray, scanned me once before returning to his alpha. "Kieran, your return is welcome." His voice was a deep, steady bass. "Torin," Kieran acknowledged his beta. Then, without turning, his voice rang out, clear and absolute, cutting through the tense quiet. "This is Alara. She is under my protection. She is to be treated as your future Luna. Any disrespect to her is treason against me." A shockwave went through the crowd. I heard the sharp intakes of breath. I saw the widened eyes, the disbelieving stares, the quickly masked scowls. "Luna, me?" The word was absurd, a cruel joke. I saw a young, brutish-looking male with cold blue eyes near the front, his lip curled into an unmistakable sneer. His gaze wasn't just hostile, it was a promise of challenge. Kieran's hand settled on the small of my back, a firm, possessive pressure. "Come," he said, his tone leaving no room for anything but obedience. He guided me through the parting crowd toward the largest den carved into the base of the cliff. The den inside was a stark contrast to the harsh exterior. It was spacious, warm from a large hearth and furnished with heavy wooden furniture and thick furs. A table held a simple but hearty meal. It was more solid, more substantial than my father's den as beta, but the comfort was an illusion. The walls were solid rock. The single small window was set high up, covered by a thick hide. It was a gilded cage. "This is where you will stay," Kieran said, his voice softer now but no less commanding. He gestured to a heavy wooden door. "Your room is there. You will be safe." Safe? The word burst from me, tinged with a hysterical edge I couldn't control. Or trapped. His golden eyes met mine, and for a second I saw something flicker, not anger, but something like understanding. "For now, they are the same thing," he said quietly. "The world outside these walls would devour you, Alara. Here you have a chance. Eat, rest." He turned and left, the leather flap falling shut behind him with a sound of finality. I was alone. The silence in the den was worse than the silence in the clearing. That had been public shame. This was private terror. I walked to the small window, pushing the hide aside. A sliver of starry sky was visible, impossibly far away. I couldn't reach it. I couldn't climb out. I was indeed safe, and I was utterly, completely trapped. The Alpha of Shadow Ridge had claimed me, but as I stood in the center of that luxurious room, a cold realization dawned. I hadn't been saved from the wilderness. I had been brought to the heart of a different kind of wild, one ruled by a king whose laws I didn't understand, surrounded by wolves who saw me as an enemy, a weakness. My first challenge wouldn't be surviving the forest, it would be surviving my first dawn in this fortress of shadows. And as the torchlight from the yard flickered against my window, I saw the silhouette of the sneering wolf, Fenris, staring up at my prison, waiting. The message was clear. The Alpha's protection was a shield, but shields can be broken. The real war for my place here was just beginning. Chapter 4, The Gauntlet of Eyes. 2 days, 2 endless days of silence broken only by the scrape of a wooden tray on stone. A stern, older she-wolf named Marin brought my meals. She never spoke. Her eyes, the color of flint, would sweep over me, giving away nothing, no pity, no hostility, just a flat, empty assessment. Then she would leave, as silent as a ghost. The solitude was its own kind of torture. It gave the fear room to grow, to twist into monstrous shapes in my mind. I was a ghost in a gilded tomb. On the third morning, something in me snapped. I couldn't breathe the same air, thick with wood smoke and another's dominance for another moment. I needed the sky. Pushing aside the heavy door flap, I stepped out into the sharp, cold air of the yard. The 2 guards flanking the entrance stiffened, their hands drifting toward the weapons at their belts, but they did not stop me. Their orders were clear. I was not to be caged inside, but my prison walls had just expanded to encompass the entire keep. The yard was a symphony of controlled violence. Warriors sparred with a brutal, efficient grace that was terrifying to watch. No ceremony, no rules, just the stark economy of movement meant to disable or kill. She-wolves worked hides with knives as long as my forearm, their hands just as scarred and capable as the men's. Children, few and quiet, watched with eyes older than their years. This was not a pack, it was a legion of survivors, honed sharp by hardship. I moved along the edge of the activity, a shadow among shadows, trying to piece together the world I'd been thrown into. Whispers trailed in my wake, snippets caught on the wind. A Silverfang reject, why would he, weakness, she'll get us all killed. The words were daggers, but I kept my chin up, my father's lessons on pride the only armor I had left. I learned more by listening. They spoke of Kieran with a mix of awe and terror, the stone-hearted Alpha, the king of the ruined. He was ruthless, yes. But they also spoke of raids turned back, of rogues driven from their borders, of a safe, if hard, territory. He had built this pack from nothing, from exiles, orphans, and the broken. He was feared because he had taken the wolves no one else wanted and forged them into something formidable. My fragile observation was shattered by a low, mocking voice that slithered over the clang of practice blades. "See something you like, stray?" I turned. It was him, the sneering wolf from my first night. Up close, he was younger than I thought, but his eyes were old with cruelty. Two others flanked him, their smiles unpleasant. "My name is Alara," I said, forcing my voice steady. "I know what your name is," he said, taking a step closer. The name was Fenris. "I think our alpha's finally lost his mind, bringing a little unclaimed scrap like you into Shadow Ridge. You smell of fear and failure. You don't belong here." His cronies chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Whatever trick you used on him won't work on the rest of us. We know what you are, nothing." The old shame rose, hot and choking, but beneath it, that new spark of anger, the one born in the fifth silence, flared. "I didn't retreat. The Alpha seems to think differently," I said, my voice colder than I felt. Fenris's smile vanished. "The Alpha is making a mistake, and mistakes in Shadow Ridge get corrected." He took another menacing step, his intent clear. This was more than taunting. This was a challenge to the very order Kieran had declared. Before I could react, before I could even think to reach for the knife I didn't have at my belt, the air changed. It grew heavy, charged, as if before a lightning strike. The noisy yard fell into a dead, instantaneous hush. A shadow fell over us. "Is there a problem, Fenris?" Kieran's voice was quiet, so terribly, dangerously quiet. It didn't raise above a murmur, but it cut through the silence like a whip crack. Fenris and his friends froze, their bravado evaporating, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. They turned as one, their faces draining of blood. Kieran stood behind me. I hadn't heard him approach. He was simply there. His presence was a physical force, a wave of power that pressed down on everyone in the yard. He didn't look at me. His burning gold eyes were locked on Fenris. "No, Alpha," Fenris stammered, his voice cracking, "just talking to the newcomer, welcoming her. Welcoming." Kieran repeated the word, dripping with frost. He took one slow, deliberate step forward. "It looked to me like you were questioning my judgment. It sounded to me like you were disrespecting your future Luna." Each word was a hammer blow, falling in the utter stillness. Fenris opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Kieran moved. It was a blur of motion, too fast for my eyes to truly follow. One moment he was beside me, the next his hand was around Fenris's throat, lifting the larger male completely off the ground. Fenris gagged, his feet kicking uselessly in the air. "Let this be the only warning." Kieran's voice boomed now, no longer quiet, ringing with a wrath that shook the very stones of the keep. He addressed the entire pack, his gaze sweeping over every stunned face. "She is under my protection. She is to be treated with the honor befitting a Luna. An insult to her is an insult to me. A threat to her is a declaration of war against your Alpha. There will be no second chances." He held Fenris aloft for a horrifying, eternal second, a terrifying display of absolute power. Then he slammed him down onto the hard-packed earth. The impact was a sickening thud. Fenris lay there, gasping, clutching his throat, utterly broken. Kieran turned his back on him as if he were trash. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then his hand was on my arm, not gentle, but firm. "Come," he said, and the word was a command that brooked no argument. He guided me back toward the den, leaving the yard in a silence more profound than before. The lesson was over. It had been written in violence and fear, and as I walked beside him, my heart thundering, I understood the terrible truth. Kieran hadn't just protected me. He had painted a target on my back for every wolf in Shadow Ridge who doubted him. His shield was made of fear, and fear makes people desperate, and desperate people do reckless, terrible things. The gauntlet had been thrown, not by Fenris, but by my own protector, and I was completely, terrifyingly unprepared for what would come next. Chapter 5: The Stone and the Storm. Back inside the den, the roaring fire felt like a mockery. The warmth couldn't reach the chill that had settled deep in my bones. Kieran released my arm and stood before the hearth, his back to me, his shoulders a tense line. I expected fury. I expected a lecture for causing trouble. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. When he finally turned, his face held no anger. Instead, I saw something that shocked me more, a weary, grim resolve. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, his voice low. The simple question, so normal, so unexpected, shattered my frozen state. "You almost killed him," I whispered, the image of Fenris being slammed to the ground flashing behind my eyes. "But I did not," Kieran stated, his tone factual. "He will heal. His pride will not. That was necessary." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "Alara, you must understand, this pack, it is not Silverfang. We are not bound by gentle traditions or old bloodlines. We are a pack of shattered pieces I have glued together with will and strength. Each wolf here carries a wound from the world that cast them out. Here, strength is the only currency. The only law, a moment of perceived weakness, is an invitation for the whole structure to collapse." He stepped closer, the firelight casting his face in sharp relief. "When I brought you here, I did not just claim a mate. I made a statement. You became a symbol of my will, of my choice. Fenris wasn't just testing you, he was testing me, testing whether my words still held absolute power. If I had shown mercy, if I had hesitated, it would have been a signal. Others would have seen a crack in the wall. They would have come for you, and through you, they would have tried to tear down everything I have built." His golden eyes held mine, filled with a terrible, heavy truth. What I did out there was not cruelty, it was preservation. For you, for them, for this fragile kingdom of outcasts. The weight of his words pressed down on me. I saw not a tyrant in that moment, but a king balancing a crumbling world on his shoulders. A king whose crown was forged from thorns and responsibility. "You rule through fear," I breathed, the realization dawning. "I rule through what works," he corrected, his voice softening slightly. "Fear is a tool, a blunt one, but sometimes it is the only tool that keeps the wolves from tearing each other apart. I do not enjoy it, but I will use it until a better way can be built." He was offering me a glimpse behind the mask of the feared alpha. It was a confession, a terrifying vulnerability, and it changed everything. The monster I had feared was just a man carrying a burden too heavy for one soul. The next morning, a knock came at my chamber door. It wasn't Marin. It was Torin, the silver-streaked beta. His calm, gray eyes assessed me. "The Alpha asked me to see you," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "He believes understanding might be a better defense than ignorance." "Understanding what?" I asked, wary. "How to be the Luna of Shadow Ridge," he stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Here, that is not a title you wear, it is a role you fight for. Our Luna must know our land, our laws, our enemies. She must earn respect, not just have it demanded for her. She must be as strong as the Alpha in her own way." His words struck a chord deep within me, a chord that had been silent for 5 years. In Silverfang, a Luna was a graceful figurehead, a mother to the pack. Torin was describing a partner, a warrior queen. It was terrifying, and it was the first time anyone had suggested I could be more. I don't know how," I admitted, the old shame rising. No one is born knowing, Torin said, a hint of something like kindness in his eyes, but you can learn. If you are willing, he paused, letting the choice hang in the air. A real choice, my first one since arriving. Your first lesson begins at noon in the training yard. When I arrived, the pack was there, watching. The memory of Fenris was a fresh bruise on the air. Torin stood by a rack of wooden practice weapons. He tossed me a staff. It was heavier than it looked, awkward in my untrained hands. Strength is not just muscle, Torin began, his voice a steady, patient instructor's tone. It is balance, it is knowing where you stand and where your opponent stands. Your past is not your fault, but here it is a vulnerability. We will turn it into a strength. He showed me a basic stance, correcting my feet, my grip, my posture. He was meticulous, impersonal. He treated me not as a fragile female or a future Luna, but as a raw recruit. It was freeing. Then the lesson began. I will attack, you will block. His first swing was slow, deliberate. I stumbled, my block clumsy, the impact jarring my bones. Again and again, I was a mess of panic and flailing limbs. I tripped, I fell. The dust of the yard coated my skin, mixed with sweat. A low snicker came from the crowd. My cheeks burned. The old, familiar urge to shrink, to disappear, washed over me. I fell hard after a clumsy parry, the staff skittering away. The laughter was louder now. Hot tears of frustration pricked my eyes. I stayed on the ground, defeated. I can't, I whispered to the dirt. Torin's staff tapped the ground near my hand. Get up, Alara. They're laughing, I choked out. He looked over at the crowd, his expression hardening. Then he looked back at me and his voice dropped for my ears only. Let them laugh. Mockery is the shield of the coward. You are here, you are trying. That makes you braver than any of them. He extended the end of his staff. Now, get up. The lesson is not over. His words were a spark in the tinder of my shame, braver than them. I looked at his steady gray eyes, then at the mocking faces. A cold, clear fury replaced the humiliation. My family had laughed. My pack had scorned me. I would not let these wolves do the same. Gritting my teeth, I grabbed the staff. I pulled myself up, ignoring the ache in my muscles, the sting of my scraped palms. I raised the weapon, my grip white-knuckled, my stance still imperfect, but my resolve hardening into something new, something unbreakable. Torin gave a single, slow nod. Again. And as I took my stance, I caught a movement from the corner of my eye. Kieran stood in the shadow of the main den, watching. His arms were crossed, his face unreadable. But as our eyes met across the yard, he gave me one single, imperceptible nod. It wasn't the possessive claim of the alpha. It was the quiet acknowledgement of a warrior seeing another warrior begin to rise. That nod, small as it was, felt like a victory. My first real one. And as I turned back to face Torin, the wooden staff feeling a little lighter in my hands, I knew with a certainty that shook me to my core. I was no longer just the Alpha's claimed mate. I was a student of Shadow Ridge, and I would learn. No matter what it cost. Chapter 6, Whispers in the Rock. The days began to form a new, grueling rhythm. Dawn brought Marin's silent tray. Morning brought the burn of training. Torin was a relentless but fair master. He drilled footwork until my legs trembled, repeated blocks until my arms were a canvas of purple and yellow bruises. Progress was a slow, painful crawl, but it was progress. The clumsy flailing began to solidify into deliberate movement. The panicked gasps turned into controlled breaths. The snickers from the onlookers faded, replaced by silent, watchful stares. I learned to ignore them, to narrow my world down to the feel of the staff in my hands, the sound of wood meeting wood, the steady cadence of Tauren's instructions. The pain in my muscles became a familiar companion, a sign not of weakness but of transformation. One afternoon, the lesson shifted. We were practicing a complex disarming maneuver. I was focused, my movements cleaner than they'd ever been. Then, in a move I didn't see coming, Tauren hooked his staff behind my ankle and swept my legs out from under me. I landed flat on my back, the air whooshing from my lungs, staring up at the iron-gray sky. Frustration, hot and immediate, boiled over. Before he could speak, before he could offer a hand, I was scrambling up. A raw, wordless cry tore from my throat, and I launched myself at him, not with technique, but with pure, unadulterated fury. My attack was wild, reckless, born of weeks of pent-up shame and struggle. He disarmed me in 2 moves, pinning me gently but firmly against the weapon rack, his practice staff a light pressure against my collarbone. The yard was silent. "Good," Tauren said, and his voice held a note I hadn't heard before, approval. "Anger is a tool. You are learning to wield it." He released me and stepped back. "Enough for today." As I stood there, chest heaving, I felt a familiar, powerful gaze. Kieran stood in his usual spot, shadowed by the overhang. How long had he been watching? His golden eyes met mine across the distance. His expression was as unreadable as the cliff face. But then he did something that stopped my heart. He gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. It was the same nod as before, but heavier now. Laden with a respect that wasn't given, but earned. That nod was a sunbreak in my stormy world. It warmed something frozen deep inside me. My father, Abeda, had never looked at me that way. No one ever had. I had earned that with my own sweat and will. The next morning, Kieran himself intercepted me as I left the den. "Tauren teaches you to fight," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But a Luna must know more than battle. Today you learn with me." My heart did a nervous flutter. I simply nodded, falling into step beside him. We walked through the keep, past the training yard where wolves paused to watch us pass. The whispers were different now, not contemptuous but speculative, respectful even if grudgingly so. We left through the main gate and began to climb a narrow, winding trail up the mountainside. The air grew thin and cold. When we finally reached the summit, the world fell away below us. "This," Kieran said, his voice quiet with something like reverence, "is Shadow Ridge." It was a breathtaking, terrifying vista. The keep below was a dark stone nestled in the valley's palm. A silver river cut through the black-green forest like a scar. Jagged peaks clawed at the sky in every direction. He pointed to a narrow, dark slit between 2 mountains. "The Serpent's Pass, the only way for an army to approach. It is watched always." His finger moved to a series of rolling, wooded hills. "The Whispering Woods, the ground is soft, treacherous for a charge. We have pitfalls and snares there." He showed me hidden water sources, defensible ridges, blind spots in the patrol routes. He was giving me the secrets of his kingdom, not as a prize to his mate, but as a strategist to a fellow commander. He was showing me its soul, its strengths, its vulnerable heart. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice soft with awe. "Why show me all this?" He turned to me, the wind tugging at his dark hair. His golden eyes were utterly serious. "Because a Luna does not just live in her alpha's territory. She must be a part of it, she must love it, she must understand why every stream, every stone is worth fighting for and worth dying for." He looked back over the vast, wild landscape, his profile stern. To protect this pack, you must first understand what you are protecting. In that moment, high above the world, something shifted between us. The fear wasn't gone, but it was now woven with strands of something else, a dawning respect, a shared sense of duty. He wasn't just my captor or my claimed mate, he was my teacher. And this harsh, beautiful, unforgiving land was becoming my home. But as we stood there in the silence of the peaks, a distant, echoing howl reached us, lonely, desperate, and coming from the direction of the Serpent's Pass. It wasn't a patrol signal, it was a cry of pain. Kieran's body went rigid, all his focus snapping toward the sound. The peace of the lesson shattered. "What is it?" I asked, a new fear threading through me. He didn't answer at first, his eyes scanning the distant pass, his jaw tight. "Trouble," he finally said, the word clipped and cold. "The kind that doesn't knock politely at the gate." He turned, his earlier openness gone, replaced by the hard mask of the Alpha. "We return, now." The journey down was swift and silent, charged with a new tension. The lesson was over. A different kind of test was beginning. The howl hung in the air between us, a ghostly question mark over our newfound understanding. What had crossed into Kieran's kingdom? And what darkness was about to descend upon the fortress of shadows? Chapter 7. The cracks in the wall, the peaceful rhythm of my new life shattered like thin ice. The moment we returned through the gates, the keep was a hive of grim activity. Warriors gathered weapons, their faces set in hard lines. Whispers flew, sharp, urgent things that died the moment Kieran passed. Torin met us in the yard, his usual calm replaced by a focused intensity. "Scouts are back," he reported, his voice low. "From the Serpent's Pass, it's not an army." "What is it?" Kieran's voice was flat, dangerous. "Refugees," Torin said, and the word hung heavily in the air. "A handful from the Ashwind pack to the far east. Their alpha is dead, their pack was decimated, they're starving, wounded, and they're being hunted. Hunted." The word sent a chill down my spine. I remembered the howl, the raw pain in it. Kieran's expression didn't change, but I saw the conflict in the tightness of his jaw. Shadow Ridge was a fortress for the broken, yes. But it was also a fortress that survived by being closed, by being impenetrable. Letting in strangers, especially ones trailing danger, it was a risk that could unravel everything. "Hunted by who?" I asked before I could stop myself. Both men looked at me. Torin's gaze was assessing. Kieran's was unreadable. "By the ones who destroyed their pack," Kieran said finally. "A rogue band, not wolves with territory, but wolves who live by pillage and slaughter. They call themselves the Blood Moon Marauders." He turned back to Torin. "How close?" "A day, maybe less." "The refugees are barely ahead of them." A heavy silence fell. The decision hung in the balance. To offer sanctuary was to invite a war to our very gates. To turn them away was to condemn them to a brutal death. "Bring them in," Kieran commanded, his voice leaving no room for debate. "The wounded to the healing cave. Post double guards on the pass and on all walls. Everyone stays sharp." Torin nodded, relief and tension warring on his face, and moved to carry out the orders. Kieran looked down at me. "This changes things, Alara. The walls are not just stone now. They are a line between life and death. You will stay in the den. Marin will bring your meals. You will not leave." It was not a suggestion. It was the Alpha's decree, the Protector's wall slamming down again. The trust of the mountaintop was gone, replaced by the necessity of the fortress. The frustration was a hot stone in my throat, but I saw the genuine worry in his eyes, not just for his pack, but for me. I simply nodded, the taste of confinement bitter on my tongue. Later, from the small, high window of my room, I watched them arrive. A pitiful, ragged group of 5, 2 men, a woman clutching a young boy, and an older she-wolf leaning heavily on a stick. They were hollow-eyed, clothes torn, smeared with dirt and what looked like dried blood. The Shadow Ridge wolves formed a silent, wary corridor for them, their expressions a mix of pity and deep suspicion. I saw Fenris, his throat still mottled with bruises, watching with a cold, calculating gleam in his eyes. This was a weakness, an opening. That night the keep felt different. The usual sounds of evening, low talk, the crackle of fires were muted, replaced by an alert, waiting silence. I couldn't sleep. The fear was a tangible thing in the dark. A soft sound made me freeze, not from the yard, but from within the den itself. A faint scrape against the outer door, then a whisper so low it was almost imagined. "I'm not safe there inside." My blood turned to ice. I slid from my bed, pressing my ear to my chamber door. Nothing, had I imagined it, a trap set by my own fear. But then a shadow moved past the thin crack of light under my door, a shape that was not Kieran-esque, not Tauren-esque, and too stealthy to be Marin. Panic, sharp and clean, shot through me. The den was supposed to be the safest place. But what if the danger wasn't outside the walls, but already within them? What if the Blood Moon marauders weren't just hunting the refugees, but had sent scouts ahead? Or worse, what if someone inside Shadow Ridge saw this chaos as the perfect moment to make a move? The Alpha's protection felt like a paper shield. His walls had a crack and something had slithered in. I was alone, unarmed, and the whispers in the rock had just become a direct threat. Do I scream? Do I alert Kieran and risk looking like a frightened fool, or worse, sparking a panic? Or do I stay silent, a prisoner in my own room, waiting to see if the shadow outside my door had a key? The choice was a razor's edge. And as I stood there, heart hammering against my ribs, I realized the lesson of Shadow Ridge was not just about strength. It was about knowing when to hold your ground, and when to sound the alarm before the entire fortress came crashing down around you. The silence in the den was no longer empty. It was waiting. And I had to decide, was I prey or was I a guardian of this fragile, terrifying home I was just beginning to know? Chapter 8: The Shadow in the Den. The silence in the den was a living thing, thick and pulsing with my own terror. The shadow had passed my door. No knock, no voice, just the faintest whisper of movement, then nothing. My mind raced, a frantic animal in a trap. Scouts, assassins, Fenris. The possibilities were all nightmares. My hand trembled as it reached for the only weapon I had, my grandfather's hunting knife, still wrapped in my satchel. The cool bone handle was a shock against my sweaty palm. It felt pitifully small. I crept to my chamber door, pressing my ear against the rough wood. Nothing but the distant, mournful wind whistling through the keep outside. Should I call out? A scream would bring Kieran, Tauren, the guards. It would also announce my fear, my vulnerability. In a pack balanced on a knife's edge, panic was a spark in a dry forest. But staying here, waiting for that shadow to return, that was a slow, helpless surrender. A new thought, cold and clear, cut through the fear. What if it's not about me, the refugees? The warning whisper, they're inside. What if the target wasn't the Alpha's claimed mate, but the evidence of his mercy? What if someone wanted those Ashwind survivors silenced before they could tell their story, or before Kieran could decide to fully champion their cause? My decision crystallized. I would not scream, I would not cower, I would see. With painstaking slowness, I turned the handle of my door. It opened without a sound. The main chamber of the den was dark, lit only by the faint orange glow of embers in the hearth. The air was still. I scanned the room, the large table, the heavy chairs, the woven rugs. Nothing moved. Then a faint metallic click from the direction of the den's main entrance. The sound of the outer latch being carefully, quietly lifted. They weren't inside yet. They were trying to get in. All fear burned away, replaced by a surge of protective fury. This was Kieran's den, my den. This was the heart of Shadow Ridge, and someone was trying to violate it. I didn't think. I moved. Silent as the shadow I'd become, I crossed the room, placing myself beside the heavy leather flap, my back against the cold stone wall. The knife was held tight, point outward. My breath was shallow, my entire body a coiled spring. The flap eased inward, a sliver of torchlit night air whispering through. A figure, cloaked and hooded in dark fabric, slipped inside. They paused, listening, their head turning toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms, to Kieran's room and to mine. This was my moment. A scream would come too late. Action was the only language this place understood. As the intruder took a step forward, I lunged. Not with the knife. I wasn't a killer. I slammed my whole body weight into them, driving them off balance and into the heavy wooden table with a grunt of surprise. The cloak tangled around them. I scrambled back, putting the table between us, my knife raised. "Who are you?" My voice was a low, fierce snarl, surprising even me. "Speak." The figure righted itself, a hand going to its side, not for a weapon, but to a bruised rib. The hood fell back. It wasn't a stranger. It was the older she-wolf from the Ashwind refugees. Her face was gaunt, etched with exhaustion and fresh fear, but her eyes were sharp, darting to the entrance and then back to me. You are the Alpha's Luna." She whispered, her voice ragged. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, not lowering the knife. "Why are you sneaking into the Alpha's den?" "To warn him," she hissed, desperation cracking her voice. "The danger is not just coming, it is here, in your pack. There is a traitor. They mean to open the gate for the marauders. Tonight." The world tilted. A traitor, inside Shadow Ridge. The cold calculation in Fenris's eyes flashed in my mind. The whispers, the unrest. This wasn't an external attack, it was a rot from within. "Who?" I breathed. "I don't know a name," she said, her hands pleading. But in the healing cave, I heard two guards talking, whispering about the plan, about when the signal comes. They saw me listening. I think they are coming for me, to silence me. I had to come to the Alpha. Her story rang with a terrible truth. It explained the shadow, the fear. She hadn't been a threat to me. She'd been fleeing for her life, trying to reach the one person who could stop a massacre. The sound of booted feet, hurried and trying to be quiet, echoed from the stone corridor outside the den. More than one pair, headed this way. The old she-wolf's eyes widened in terror. "They're coming." I had seconds. Do I hide her? Do I stand and fight? I was one untrained girl with a knife against what sounded like multiple conspirators. But the Alpha's den was the strongest place in the keep, and I was its guardian now. "Get behind me," I ordered, my voice suddenly steady. I moved to the entrance, not to flee, but to face it. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs, and did the one thing I had decided against moments before. I screamed, not a scream of fear. A scream of defiance, of alarm, a clarion call that shattered the deceptive silence of the keep. "Alpha, to the den, betrayal." The footsteps outside skidded to a halt. The old she-wolf gasped. And from the depths of his chamber I heard the thunderous roar of Kieran awakening, a sound of pure, unleashed fury. The game was up. The shadow was exposed. And as the first traitor's face appeared in the doorway, contorted with shock and rage, I knew the true war for Shadow Ridge had just begun, and it had started in my own home. Chapter 9: The Unmasking. The world exploded into motion and sound. The traitor in the doorway, a guard named Rourke, his face now a mask of snarling fury, lunged at me. Time slowed. I saw the glint of his drawn dagger, the surprise in his eyes that I was standing my ground. My training with Torin wasn't for elegant duels, it was for survival. I didn't try to parry. I dropped low, a clumsy but effective move, and slashed my knife upward, not to kill, but to cut. The blade caught his forearm. He roared in pain, his own strike going wide. It was enough. It bought a single, vital heartbeat. That heartbeat was all Kieran needed. He burst from his chamber like a storm-given flesh. He wasn't fully dressed, just in trousers, his chest bare, but he was more weapon than man. He didn't see me or the old she-wolf cowering behind the table. He saw Rourke, the drawn blade, the violation of his den. A guttural, earth-shaking growl ripped from his throat. He crossed the room in 2 strides. His hand shot out, not for the dagger, but for Rourke's throat. He lifted the traitorous guard off his feet and slammed him into the stone wall with a crack that spoke of breaking bones. Rourke went limp, slumping to the floor, but it wasn't over. 2 more figures appeared at the entrance: Fenris, his eyes alight with a fanatical gleam, and another warrior I recognized as one of his cronies. They froze, seeing their accomplice down, and the Alpha, a golden-eyed avatar of wrath, standing between them and their goal. The gate. Fenris spat his plan in ruins. Forget the old crone, sound the signal. Now, his companion fumbled for a horn at his belt. If that horn blew, it would tell the marauders outside that the way was open. Chaos, slaughter. Kieran moved toward them, but he was across the room. I was closer, and I saw the horn, saw the man's panicked fingers closing on it. I didn't think. I threw my knife. It wasn't a warrior's throw. It was a desperate, wild heave. The knife spun through the air, handle over blade, and struck the man square in the chest with the pommel. Not a killing blow, but a stunning one. The air left his lungs in a whoosh, the horn clattering from his hands, skittering across the stone floor toward me. Fenris snarled, pure hatred directed at me now. He shifted, his bones cracking, fur erupting, not to attack Kieran, but to go for the horn or for me, but he never got the chance. Torin and a flood of loyal guards, alerted by my scream and the cacophony, poured into the den from the corridor behind Fenris. In seconds, it was over. Fenris and his accomplice were subdued, disarmed, held fast in the grip of their former packmates. The silence that followed was louder than the fight. Heavy breathing, the moan of the injured Rourke, the terrified whimper of the Ashwind elder. Kieran stood in the center of the room, his gaze sweeping from the captured traitors to the horn on the floor to me, still standing defensively in front of the old she-wolf, my hands empty. His golden eyes blazed, but the fury was now mixed with something else, a profound, shocking intensity. He walked toward me, each step echoed. He stopped before me, looking down. He didn't touch me, he just looked, as if seeing me for the very first time. "Ilara," he said, and my name on his lips was a vow, an acknowledgement. "Report." The single, commanding word grounded me. I took a shaky breath. The Ashwind elder Nara came to warn us. She overheard guards in the healing cave conspiring to open the gate for the Blood Moon marauders tonight. They were coming to silence her. I heard someone enter the den. I intercepted her, and then they came. I gestured to Rourke, to Fenris. Kieran's gaze shifted to Nara, who managed a trembling nod. Then he turned his molten gaze on Fenris, held struggling between two guards. You would sacrifice your own pack for what? Power? A marauder's promise? Fenris spat on the floor at Kieran's feet. You are weak. You bring in strays and rejects, you let this nothing sit at your side. You dilute our strength with your mercy. The marauders offer a pure pack, a strong one. They promised me a beta's rank for delivering the gate. His words were a poison, but they hung in the air, revealing the rot. It was a rebellion born of bigotry and twisted ambition. Kieran stared at him, and his expression was not of rage, but of icy, infinite contempt. You are no beta. You are not even a wolf of Shadow Ridge. You are a cancer. He looked to Torin. Lock them in the mountain cells, all of them, interrogate them. I want every name, every detail of their plans. Then, at dawn, they will face pack justice. Torin nodded grimly and began barking orders. The traitors dragged away. Kieran then turned to the guards who had arrived. Triple the watch on the walls. No one opens the gate without my direct order. Send scouts to the pass, see if the marauders are moving, waiting for their signal. The room cleared, leaving only Kieran, me, and the trembling Nara. He finally looked at me again. The intensity hadn't faded. You were armed with a knife. You could have hidden. You could have simply cried out. Why did you stand? The question was quiet, searching for the truth of my heart. I met his gaze, the last of my adrenaline fading, leaving me raw and honest. Because this is my home now, I whispered, my voice trembling not with fear, but with conviction. And I will not let anyone take it from us. For a long, silent moment, he just looked at me. The fierce alpha, the feared king, seemed to see straight through to my soul. Then he did something that stole my breath. He bowed his head. A slight, profound dip of respect from the alpha to his Luna. Thank you, he said, the words simple, heavy, and real. In that moment, in the wreckage of the betrayed den, something new was forged between us. Not a claim of possession, but a bond of loyalty. A partnership forged in the fire of treachery. I was no longer just the girl he saved. I was the woman who had helped save his kingdom. And as the first gray light of dawn touched the high window, I knew nothing in Shadow Ridge would ever be the same again. Chapter 10. The price of mercy. Dawn arrived not with peace, but with the grim execution of justice. The traitors Fenris, Rourke, and two others whose names were dragged from them in the dark cells were brought before the entire pack in the central yard. The mood was somber, the air brittle with tension and betrayal. There was no ceremony, no long speech. Kieran stood before them, his face like carved granite. You plotted the murder of your packmates, his voice, though not loud, carried to the farthest corners. You sought to unleash slaughter upon this haven for a traitor's reward. There is no pardon for this. He looked to the pack, to the shocked and angry faces of wolves who had trained beside these men. Shadow Ridge was built on loyalty. It survives by it. This is the price of treason. He did not carry out the sentence himself. He gave the order to Torin. It was swift, clinical, and final, a lesson written in the ultimate price. As the pack dispersed, a heavy silence lingered, thicker than the morning fog. Mercy had a limit, and they had all just seen its sharp, unforgiving edge. Later, in the council cave, a rough-hewn chamber where Kieran met with his senior warriors, the atmosphere was grim. Torin reported the findings from the interrogations. The plan had been simple: open the eastern postern gate at midnight, signal with a horn, and let the marauders flood in. The chaos would have been absolute. The marauders are still out there, a grizzled warrior named Garrick stated, pounding a fist on the map table. They were waiting for a signal that never came. They know we're onto them now. They'll either flee or they'll get desperate. They will attack, Kieran said, his finger tracing a route on the map. They are predators. They've tasted blood from Ashwind. They won't leave empty-handed. They will test our walls. He looked around the room, his gaze finally settling on me. I had been invited to sit in, a silent observer. We must be ready. We fortify the weak points. We set traps in the woods before the gates. We fight not just to defend, but to eradicate this threat. The plans were made, orders given. As the council broke, Kieran motioned for me to stay. When we were alone, the weight of his leadership seemed to settle visibly on his shoulders. You saw the price today, he said, his voice low. This is the reality of the crown I wear. It is not just about building, it is often about destroying. To protect the whole, sometimes a part must be cut away. He looked at me, his golden eyes searching. Can you bear this, the sight of it, the necessity of it? It was the most vulnerable he had ever been with me. He was asking not for my approval, but for my understanding. My stomach was still churning from the morning's events, the finality of it all. But I thought of Nara's terrified face, of the butchery that would have come through that gate. I don't know if I can ever bear it, I answered honestly, my voice quiet. But I understand it. I saw what they wanted to do. Mercy for the wolf is cruelty to the sheep. You protected the sheep. I met his gaze. You did what an alpha must do. He studied me for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Then you understand more than most. He paused. I need you to do something, a different kind of duty. Anything. The refugees, they are terrified. They see us executing our own and fear they are next. They need compassion, a leader's gentle hand. It is a strength I do not possess. Will you see to them? Assure them of their safety. My heart swelled. He was trusting me not with a blade, but with the fragile trust of the broken. It was a task just as vital as guarding a wall. I will, I promised. I found Nara and the other Ashwind survivors in the healing cave. The young boy named Elian was curled against his mother, his eyes huge. They flinched when I entered. Please, I said softly, holding up my empty hands. No harm will come to you here. You have my word and the Alpha's word. You are under the protection of Shadow Ridge. Nara's wary eyes met mine. We saw the justice. You saw the protection of it, I corrected gently, kneeling so I was not towering over them. The men who died today were the same ones who would have let the monsters who hurt you inside these walls. What you witnessed was the Alpha cutting out a sickness to keep the body healthy. Your body is now part of this one. He protects his own. Slowly, the tension began to ease from their shoulders. The mother, Alara, began to weep silent tears of relief. I stayed with them, helping the healer change bandages, speaking softly to Elian about the hawks that nested on the cliffs. It was a different kind of strength, one of quiet presence, of building trust brick by brick. As I left the cave hours later, I saw Kieran watching from across the yard. He didn't approach. He just gave me that same slight nod of acknowledgement. But this time there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a shared understanding. That night, as I prepared for bed, a soft knock came at my chamber door. It was Torin. He held a bundle of dark, supple leather. From the Alpha, he said, his gruff voice softer than usual. He noticed you had no proper gear. I unwrapped it. Inside was a set of finely made leathers, a vest, bracers, trousers tailored to my size, and beneath them a dagger. Not my simple bone-handled knife, but a true weapon, its hilt wrapped in dark leather, its blade sharp and clean. It was a gift, not of possession but of equipment, for a warrior, for a partner. I ran my fingers over the cool leather, a lump forming in my throat. He saw me not just as a responsibility or a symbol. He saw what I could be, what I was becoming. As I held the dagger, the first alarm horn blared from the eastern wall, a long, mournful note that shattered the night. The marauders weren't waiting for dawn. They were here. The test of mercy was over. The test of war had begun. And this time, I would not be hiding in a gilded cage. I would be standing on the wall, my new leathers creaking softly, my hand on the hilt of my dagger, ready to defend my home. The rejected she-wolf was gone. In her place stood a daughter of Shadow Ridge, and she would not falter. Chapter 11, The Siege of Shadow Ridge. The horn's mournful wail was a cold spear through the heart of the night. For a second, the entire keep held its breath. Then, chaos erupted in ordered, furious motion. Boots pounded on stone. Shouted commands echoed off the cliffs. The siege was no longer a threat. It was a reality hammering at our gates. I scrambled into the new leathers Kieran had gifted me. They fit perfectly, moving with me like a second skin. The dagger felt solid, real at my belt, a tool, not just a token. I was out of my chamber in moments, joining the stream of warriors flowing toward the main yard. Kieran was already there, a pillar of calm in the storm. He was in full battle gear, a grim finality in his stance. His eyes found me immediately in the throng. For a fleeting second, our gazes locked. There was no time for words, but 1,000 passed between us in that look. Stay safe, be strong. This is why we fight. He turned, his voice a clarion call that cut through the din. To the walls, archers to the towers. Hold the line, no one sets foot inside Shadow Ridge. I followed Torin up a narrow, steep staircase carved into the inner wall. The night air at the top was frigid, whipping my braided hair around my face. Below, in the pitch-black woods beyond the torchlight of our walls, shadows moved. Many shadows. The Blood Moon marauders were a seething, formless mass of malice at the edge of our light. Their howls were not the unified songs of a pack, but ragged, hungry cries that spoke of pillage and pain. A torch sailed in a high arc from the darkness. It landed on the thatched roof of a storage hut inside the walls, but thankfully outside the main compound. It sputtered, caught. Warriors below rushed to douse it. This is a probe, Torin muttered beside me, his eyes scanning the tree line. They're testing our readiness, looking for weakness. As if on cue, a concentrated group of marauders surged forward toward the main gate, carrying a heavy, makeshift battering ram, a felled tree stripped of branches. Their charge was a chaotic, screaming tide. Archers loose, Torin bellowed. A volley of arrows hissed through the night. Some found their marks, figures crumpled in the dirt, but many clattered harmlessly against shields or missed in the dark. The ram reached the gate. The first thunderous boom shook the very stones beneath my feet. I gripped the parapet, my knuckles white. Kieran was at the gate's interior, directing warriors to brace it, to pour boiling pitch from the murder holes above. The fight was a symphony of violence, the crash of the ram, the screams of the wounded, the shouts of defenders, the twang of bowstrings. Then, a new sound. A scrambling, scratching sound closer, to my right. I turned. Clawed hands appeared over the edge of the parapet, then a snarling, painted face. A marauder had scaled the wall using hooks and ropes, focusing on a section where the torchlight was dimmest. He hauled himself over, a rusty axe in hand, his eyes wild with bloodlust. The warrior next to me turned too late. I didn't think. My body moved. Torrens drills, the endless repetition took over. I wasn't Alara the rejected. I was a defender of Shadow Ridge. As the marauder raised his axe, I lunged forward, not at his weapon, but at his balance. I slammed my shoulder into his side, driving him into the stone merlin. He grunted, surprised. His axe swing went wide, clanging against the stone. He rounded on me, seeing a smaller, seemingly easier target. He snarled, spittle flying. "Pretty prize for the taking." He swung again. I ducked, the axe whistling over my head. The movement was instinctive now. I came up inside his guard, my dagger flashing out. I didn't aim to kill, I aimed to disable. The blade sliced across the back of his hand holding the axe. He howled, the weapon dropping from nerveless fingers. Before he could recover, I kicked his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the walkway. A Shadow Ridge warrior was there instantly, pressing a sword to the marauder's throat, disarming him fully. I stood there, breathing hard, the adrenaline making my hands tremble. I had done it. I had fought. I had defended my wall. Torren was at my side in an instant. He didn't praise, he assessed. "You're alive, good, next time go for the throat. Mercy has no place on a battlefield." His words were harsh, but his hand briefly clamped my shoulder in a firm, approving grip before he moved on, shouting new orders. The battle at the gate raged. The ram continued its awful rhythm, but the gate, reinforced with iron and will, held. Archers and poured pitch took a brutal toll. After what felt like an eternity, a horn sounded from the woods, not ours, but a shrill, retreating call from the marauders. The shadows retreated, melting back into the consuming darkness, leaving their dead and wounded behind. A ragged cheer went up from our walls, but it was subdued, weary. We had held, but it was only the first wave. As the gray light of a grim dawn began to stain the sky, I looked out over the scarred battlefield below. The cost was visible, and I knew with a sinking certainty that the marauders were not finished. They had tasted our strength, and they would be back, hungrier, angrier. The siege was not over, it had just begun, and as I looked down into the yard, I saw Kieran looking up at me from below. His face was smudged with soot, his expression unreadable, but he saw me standing on the wall, a part of the defense. He did not smile, he simply gave a single, slow nod. It was enough. The girl from Silverfang was gone, buried under the weight of duty and the smell of smoke. The woman on the wall, she was a warrior of Shadow Ridge, and she would not break. Not while her home still stood. Chapter 12. The poisoned well. The dawn after the first attack revealed the cost. We had lost 3 warriors, many more bore injuries. The air, once crisp with pine, now carried the acrid stink of smoke, blood, and spent fear. The victory felt hollow, fragile. The marauders had retreated, but they hadn't vanished. They were a wolf pack circling a wounded elk, waiting for a stumble. Kieran moved through the keep like a force of nature, his presence shoring up the shaken defenses, his voice quiet but absolute as he gave orders for repairs, for rotating the exhausted guards, for tending the wounded. The pack's spirit, however, was fraying. The initial unity born of survival was being tested by fatigue and the gnawing dread of a prolonged siege. I threw myself into the work, helping in the healing cave, carrying water and bandages. It was there, amidst the groans of pain, that I noticed something wrong. It started subtly. A warrior who had taken a shallow cut on his arm the day before now lay feverish, the wound an angry, weeping red. Another, who had seemed fine, was now retching into a bucket. The healer, an old, no-nonsense she-wolf named Yara, frowned as she examined them. "This is not from their wounds," she muttered, her voice low with concern. This is sickness, but it came on too fast. By midday, a dozen wolves were showing symptoms: fever, cramps, debilitating weakness. Panic, a more insidious enemy than the marauders, began to whisper through the keep. Plague, curse. Kieran summoned Yara and me to the council cave. His face was grim. "What is this?" "Poison," Yara stated bluntly. "I'd stake my life on it, something in the water or the food, affecting people unevenly based on how much they consumed." The water, my blood ran cold. Our main source was an underground spring that fed a cistern within the walls. It was supposed to be secure. "The refugees," a voice growled from the doorway. It was Garrick, the grizzled warrior, his eyes accusatory as they landed on me. "They came just before this. They're the poison." "This is how the marauders win. They soften us from within." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered warriors. Fear had found a convenient target. "Enough," Kieran's voice cut through, cold and sharp. "They are under our protection. Accusations without proof are the weapons of the foolish." But the seed was planted. I saw the distrust in the eyes of the pack, directed not just at the Ashwind survivors but at me, their advocate. My newfound standing was as fragile as glass. "We must find the source," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "And we must care for the sick. Dividing ourselves is what the real poisoners want." Kieran's golden eyes held mine. He gave a curt nod. "Yara, work on an antidote. Use whatever supplies we have. Alara, you will assist her and oversee the care of the sick. Garrick, you will come with me. We will inspect the cistern, the food stores, everything." The next hours were a blur of nightmarish activity. The healing cave became a ward of the suffering. I moved between pallets, wiping brows, forcing sips of clean water from a private reserve we'd secured, holding bowls for the retching. The fear in the eyes of the sick wolves was a tangible thing. Nara, the Ashwind elder, appeared silently at my side, her own fear forgotten as she helped tend to Shadow Ridge wolves, her gentle hands a quiet rebuke to Garrick's accusations. Meanwhile, Kieran and his team found the source. Not at the cistern, but at one of the secondary rainwater collection barrels near the barracks. A pouch of crushed, vile-smelling herbs was found submerged inside, slowly leaching its toxin. It was an inside job, someone who knew our systems, who could move without suspicion. The discovery should have brought relief. Instead, it deepened the paranoia. If not the refugees, then who? Another traitor? As dusk fell, the sickness reached its cruel fingers into the most vulnerable. Little Elian, the Ashwind boy, began to shiver, his small body burning up with fever. His mother, Alora, clutched him, rocking back and forth, her face a mask of utter terror. Yara shook her head, exhausted. "The antidote isn't ready. The child is small. He may not last the night." A desperate, helpless rage filled me. This innocent boy who had already lost everything was now dying because of our internal rot. I couldn't accept it. I left the cave, my mind racing. There were old stories, tales my grandfather told of healing moss that grew in the highest, coldest crevices, untouched by ground-born poisons. It was a desperate, foolish hope. I found Kieran by the reinforced gate, his gaze on the darkening woods. "The boy is dying," I said, my voice raw. He turned, his expression stark in the torchlight. "Yara is doing all she can. It may not be enough. I have an idea, but I need to go outside the walls." His reaction was instant, a wall of pure alpha refusal. "Absolutely not. It's a death sentence. The marauders are out there, waiting. He is a child under your protection." I shot back, the words bursting from me. What is the point of these walls, of all this strength, if we let a child die from a coward's poison inside them? You showed me the land, Kieran. You said a Luna must know it, must love it. Let me use that knowledge to save a part of it. We stood facing each other, the Alpha and the Luna in training, a gulf of fear and duty between us. His jaw worked. I could see the war in his eyes, the protector who wanted to lock me safe away, and the leader who knew that sometimes leadership meant a terrible risk. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind and a distant, agonized moan from the healing cave. Finally, his voice was a low, gravelly concession. You will have 1 hour. Torin will go with you. You will take 3 guards. You will not engage. You will not stray. If there is any sign of the marauders, you return immediately. Is that understood? Relief and terror flooded me in equal measure. Understood. He reached out, his hand gripping my arm, not to restrain but to impart the gravity of his order. Bring back the moss, Ilara, but more importantly, bring yourself back, alive. The unspoken words hung between us, charged and potent. It was no longer just about duty. It was about me. The walls were opening, not to let an enemy in, but to let a hope out. And as I turned to gather my desperate mission, I knew the true test was no longer on the battlefield. It was in the cold, dark crevices of the mountain, with the enemy lurking in the shadows and a child's life hanging in the balance. The fate of Shadow Ridge would be decided not just by swords, but by the courage to venture into the dark for a single, fragile light. Chapter 13. Into the maw of night. The postern gate was a small, heavily fortified door, hidden in the shadow of the eastern wall. It groaned open just enough for us to slip through, Torin, 3 of his steadiest warriors, and me. The night swallowed us whole the moment the gate thudded shut behind us, sealing us out of safety. The air outside was different. It was free, but it was also laced with a palpable threat, the scent of distant campfires and unwashed bodies carrying on the wind. The marauders. Torin moved like a ghost, his hand up in a silent signal. We became shadows, flitting from the cover of one rocky outcrop to the next. No one spoke. The only sounds were the scuff of our boots on stone and the frantic hammering of my own heart. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a twig felt like an ambush about to spring. My mind was a map Kieran had drawn. I led us away from the main paths up a treacherous, scree-filled gully toward the higher cliffs. The Sunstaler's Cleft, he'd called it, a deep fissure that never saw direct light where cold seeped from the stone itself. That was where the moss, if it existed, would be. We reached the base of the cliff. The cleft was a dark vertical scar in the moonlit rock face, deeper and more forbidding than I'd imagined. A cold, damp breath exhaled from its depths. "We'll keep watch here," Torin whispered, his voice barely audible. "You have 30 minutes, no more. If you're not back, we come in after you." His gray eyes were serious. "Don't make us do that." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. Taking a small lantern from one of the warriors, I turned its shutter to a thin slit, casting just enough light to see my feet, and stepped into the mouth of the cleft. The world closed in. The walls were slimy, dripping with moisture. The air was frigid, smelling of wet stone and age. I moved carefully, my lantern beam a trembling star in the profound dark. I scanned the walls, my fingers brushing over cold rock, searching for the telltale velvety green of the healing moss. Minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. Nothing but bare, weeping stone. Despair began to claw at me. It was a fool's errand, a child's story. Elian would die because of my arrogance. Then, near a bend where the cleft narrowed almost to a crack, I saw it, a faint, phosphorescent glow. Not green, but a pale, silvery blue. It was a patch of frost moss clinging to a sheltered ledge just above my head. It was real. Hope, fierce and bright, exploded in my chest. I stretched, my fingertips brushing it. Too high, I needed to climb. Setting the lantern down, I found fingerholds in the slick rock, my boots scrabbling for purchase. The leather's kieran gave me a loud for movement, but my muscles screamed with the strain. I hauled myself up, one agonizing inch at a time, until I could reach the moss. Gently, I pried a large handful of the cool, glowing plant free, stuffing it into the pouch at my belt. As I shifted my weight to climb down, my boots slipped on a patch of algae. I fell not far, but enough to land hard on the rocky floor. The breath knocked from my lungs. The lantern rocked, its shutter flying open for one blinding second, flooding the cleft with light. In that catastrophic flash of illumination, I saw it, not just the moss-covered walls. At the far, deep end of the cleft, half hidden behind a fall of rock, was a narrow passage. A secret way, and leading into it, clear in the mud, were fresh footprints, too large to be an animal, wolf prints. This wasn't just a geological feature. It was a back door, and someone had been using it. The implications crashed over me, colder than the cleft's air. The poison in the barrel, it wasn't just an inside job, it was an access job. Someone could come and go without ever touching the main gate. I scrambled for the lantern, snapping the shutter closed, plunging us back into near darkness. My heart was a frantic drum. I had the moss, but I had found something far more dangerous. I stumbled back the way I came, my mind reeling. As I neared the entrance, a low whistle sounded, Torrens all clear. I burst out into the open air, gasping. "Did you get it?" Torren asked immediately. I held up the pouch, the moss glowing faintly through the leather. "Yes, but Torren, the cleft, it goes deeper. There's a passage. And there are fresh tracks." His expression, always so controlled, shifted to one of stark alarm. He didn't question me. We move now, double time back. The return journey was a silent, desperate sprint. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound was a pursuer. We were almost to the postern gate when a new sound froze us in our tracks, not from behind, but from the woods to the north. The distinctive, guttural chanting of the blood moon marauders, much closer than before. They were on the move again. "Go." The Torren hissed, shoving me toward the gate. The guards had seen us. The small door swung open. We tumbled through, and it slammed shut, the heavy bar dropping back into place with a sound of immense finality. We were safe, for now. But I wasn't safe from the truth racing in my mind. I rushed straight to the healing cave, handing the glowing moss to a wide-eyed Yara. "Hurry!" Then I went to find Kieran. He was in the council cave, studying maps. I burst in, still covered in grime from the cleft, my chest heaving. "Alara," he was on his feet in an instant, searching me for injury. "The moss, Yara has it, but Kieran, listen." The words tumbled out. "The Sunstealer's cleft, it's not just a cleft. It's a tunnel, a hidden way into the mountainside, and there are fresh tracks inside. Someone has been using it." His golden eyes turned to ice. The implications connected in his mind faster than I could say them. The mysterious poison, the feeling of being watched from within. The traitor we executed wasn't working alone. There was a snake still in our garden with a secret path to the enemy. The relief of my safe return evaporated, replaced by a deeper, more chilling dread. We had won a skirmish on the walls. We might save a child with moss, but we were sitting atop a hive and the back door was wide open. The siege wasn't just at our gates, It was in our very bones, and the next attack wouldn't come from the front. It would come from the dark, silent heart of the mountain itself. Chapter 14, The Heart of the Mountain. The council cave felt like a tomb. Kieran's face, illuminated by the single oil lamp, was a mask of grim realization. The hidden passage changed everything. The Marauders weren't just a besieging force, they were a potential infection already inside the body, waiting for the right moment to burst forth. "We seal it," Garrick growled, his fist clenched on the map table. "Today, now, collapse the entrance from the inside. And trap whatever or whoever might already be in there," Torin countered, his voice calm but urgent. "If there are marauders in that tunnel, collapsing it traps them inside our mountain. They could find another exit or worse, dig their way into the lower dens. We need to know what we're dealing with." All eyes turned to Kieran. The weight of the decision pressed on the air. He looked at me, his gaze lingering on the grime from the cleft still on my clothes. "You saw the passage. Could you lead a small team back to it, in the dark?" My stomach lurched. The thought of returning to that dripping, claustrophobic darkness, knowing it might be inhabited, was a primal terror. But I thought of Elian burning with fever. I thought of the trust in Kieran's eyes. "This was my duty now. I can lead you to the entrance," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I don't know where it goes." "That's what we'll find out," Kieran said, his decision made. "Torin, Garrick, myself, and you, Ilara, as guide. No one else knows of this. We move in 1 hour, absolute silence." The wait was agony. I checked on the healing cave. Yara had a poultice of the glowing moss on Elian's forehead. His fever had broken slightly, his breathing less ragged, a fragile victory. His mother clutched my hand, tears of gratitude in her eyes. That small hope fueled my resolve. When the time came, we were 4 shadows in the dead of night. We slipped out the same postern gate, a different kind of dread hanging over us now. The journey back to the cleft was a tense, silent retracing of steps. The woods felt watchful, malevolent. At the cleft's dark mouth, Kieran turned to me. "You will wait here, Torin with you, guard the exit." "No," I said, the words surprising even me. "I have to go. I know the way to the passage. You'll waste time feeling for it, and I need to see." I needed to face the darkness I had uncovered. Kieran's eyes searched mine in the gloom. He saw the determination, not the fear. After a long moment, he gave a single, curt nod. "Stay behind me. At the first sign of danger, you fall back. That is an order." We entered the cleft. This time we carried no light. We moved by touch and memory, our wolf senses straining in the absolute blackness. The drip of water was a clock ticking down to an unknown hour. I led them to the bend, to the fall of rock. I pointed, a gesture felt more than seen. Kieran and Garrick moved the rocks with painstaking, silent care. Behind them, a yawning blackness was revealed, exhaling air that was stale and carried a faint, foul scent. Unwashed bodies, old rot, the secret passage. Kieran went first, a phantom in the dark. I followed, Garrick behind me, Torin holding the rear at the cleft entrance. The tunnel was narrow, sloping downwards. We moved like ghosts, every sense screaming. The only sounds were our controlled breathing and the scuff of leather on stone. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, deep into the mountain's heart. Then ahead, a faint, flickering glow. Not the cool blue of moss, but the warm, dancing light of fire. And voices, muffled, guttural voices. Kieran froze, a hand raised. We pressed ourselves against the cold tunnel wall. The passage opened into a small, natural cavern. In it, around a small fire, were 3 marauders. They were off-duty, relaxed, playing a dice game with knucklebones. Their weapons were leaned against the wall, and on the far side of the cavern, stacked neatly, were crates, our crates. Stolen food stores, medical supplies, and several small, ominous barrels of black powder. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a spy post, this was a staging ground, a bomb planted in our foundation. Kieran didn't hesitate, he didn't roar a challenge, he simply moved, a shadow detaching from the wall. He was upon the first marauder before the man could blink, a hand clamping over his mouth, a sharp twist silencing him forever. Garrick was a step behind, taking the second with brutal efficiency. The third dropped his dice, fumbling for a dagger. I acted without thought. I wasn't a warrior, but I was quiet. As he turned toward the struggle, I snatched a rock from the floor and brought it down hard on the back of his head. He crumpled, unconscious. The cavern fell silent, save for the crackle of the illicit fire. The threat was neutralized, but the danger was vast and terrifying. Kieran examined the black powder, his face like stone. They weren't waiting to attack the gate, he whispered, the horror in his voice a low vibration. They were waiting to blow a hole in the mountain from the inside. To collapse the lower dens, the healing cave, the room swam. Elian, Yara, Nara, all of them directly above this monstrous plot. We take the powder, we collapse this tunnel behind us, Garrick urged, his voice tight. And leave their main force outside, now leaderless from this cell, but still armed and angry. Torin's voice came from the tunnel entrance. He'd crept forward. We have a chance to end this, now. Kieran looked from the powder to the tunnel leading back out to the marauder camp, to me. A savage plan formed in his eyes, a gambit of breathtaking risk. We use their own weapon, he said, his voice deathly quiet, but not on our mountain, on them. He explained quickly, we would rig the powder here in their own staging cavern with a long, slow fuse. We would retreat back through our tunnel, collapse our side of the cleft, and lure the marauders' main force to this location for a meeting with their infiltrators. When they gathered, the mountain would bury them. It was brutal, it was total. It was the only way to ensure Shadow Ridge's survival. The work was done with frantic, precise haste. Garrick, who knew explosives, set the charge. Kieran took trophies from the dead marauders, a dagger, a necklace to make the bait convincing. I stood guard, my heart in my throat, every second feeling like the prelude to our own burial. As the fuse was lit, a tiny, smoldering serpent in the dark, we fled back up the narrow tunnel. We didn't look back. We scrambled through the cleft, and as the last of us emerged, Torin and Garrick used pre-placed charges of their own, small ones, meant for mining, to bring down the entrance of the Sunstealer's cleft in a roar of dust and crumbling stone. The back door was sealed forever, with a lit candle of destruction left burning on the other side. We ran for the postern gate as if the demons of the deep earth were at our heels. As we stumbled back into the keep, dawn was a faint smear on the horizon. We were safe. The trap was set. Kieran turned to the guards at the wall. "Sound the horns," he commanded, his voice raw with exhaustion and grim purpose. "Make it loud. Make it sound like panic. I want the marauders to think their inside men have succeeded, that we are in disarray. Lure them to the eastern woods, to the base of the cliff below the cleft." The horns blared, a cacophony of false alarm. The stage was set. The final, terrible act was about to begin, and as I stood on the wall, watching the dark tree line, I knew there would be no glorious battle. Only justice, delivered from the heart of the very stone they had tried to use against us. The mountain itself would be the judge, jury, and executioner, and we, the survivors of Shadow Ridge, would have to live with the echoing thunder of its verdict. Chapter 15. The Echo of Stone. The false alarm horns echoed across the valley, a symphony of fabricated panic. From the walls we watched. The woods for a long, tense moment remained still. Then, movement. Like rats stirred from a nest, the blood moon marauders emerged from the tree line. They came not in a disciplined charge, but in a hungry, disorganized rush drawn by the promise of chaos from within. They streamed toward the base of the eastern cliff, directly below the now-sealed Sunstealer's cleft, where they believed their infiltrators had sown destruction. My hands were clenched on the cold stone of the parapet. Beside me, Kieran stood immobile, his golden eyes fixed on the scene below, his face a mask of stoic resolve. There was no triumph in his expression, only the heavy weight of a necessary atrocity. Torin, Garrick, the warriors all watched in silence. This was not a fight, it was an execution. The marauders gathered, a seething mass of perhaps 50 wolves howling and jeering up at our panicked walls. Their leader, a hulking brute with matted fur, stood on a rock barking orders, gesturing toward the cliff face as if expecting a door to open. Any moment now. The wait was an eternity compressed into seconds. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought of Elian's small, peaceful face as his fever broke. I thought of Nara's gentle hands. I thought of the 3 warriors we'd lost on the wall. The poison, the betrayal, this swarm below was the source of all that pain. Then the mountains spoke. It wasn't a loud crack, but a deep, subterranean thump that we felt through the soles of our boots more than heard. A vibration in the very bones of the world. For a split second, nothing happened. The marauders paused, confused. Then the cliff face bulged. A section of rock the size of a den erupted outward in a cloud of dust and deafening thunder. The explosion from within was muffled by thousands of tons of stone, but its effect was cataclysmic. A landslide of biblical proportions tore free. Boulders the size of wagons, rivers of shale and dirt, avalanched down onto the gathered marauders. There were no screams. The roar of the collapsing mountain drowned everything. It was a wave of stone and earth, relentless and absolute. It swallowed them whole. The brute leaders, the jeering warriors, their weapons, their malice, all were buried under the unforgiving wrath of the mountain they had tried to violate. The dust plume rose in a great brown cloud, blotting out the dawn. The sound echoed and echoed, bouncing between the peaks before fading into a ringing, profound silence. No one on our walls cheered, no one spoke. We stood in that silence, bearing witness to the terrible price of our survival. The enemy was gone, erased, the siege was over. The dust slowly settled, revealing a raw, scarred slope where the woods had been, a tomb of stone. Kieran was the first to move. He let out a long, slow breath, his shoulders sagging slightly under the invisible weight. "Post guards to watch the slide," he said, his voice hoarse. "Send out scouts in 2 hours to ensure there are no stragglers. The rest, tend to the wounded. See to the refugees. We begin repairs." His orders were practical, pulling us back from the edge of the abyss we had just gazed into. The pack stirred, moving to obey, their faces somber, relieved, but haunted. I couldn't move. I stared at the vast, fresh scar on the land, the finality of it chilling my soul. A warm, heavy hand came to rest on my shoulder. Kieran, he didn't pull me away. He just stood with me, sharing the weight of the view. "It had to be done," he said quietly, not to convince me, but to acknowledge the grim truth we both carried now. "I know," I whispered, my voice thin, "but knowing doesn't make it easier to bear." No, he agreed, his hand squeezing gently. It never does. The burden of leadership is that you must sometimes make the choice that stains your soul to keep others clean. Remember the child who will live. Remember the mother who will not mourn. Carry that with the other. He was right. The scales were brutal, but they balanced. We had chosen our pack, our home, our future. Later that day, with the sun finally breaking through the lingering dust, a ceremony was held in the central yard. Not for the marauders, for our own fallen warriors. Their names were spoken, their bravery honored. The pack mourned together, a united front in grief and gratitude. After, Kieran called the entire pack before the steps of the main den. He stood tall, the alpha in his full authority, but there was a new quality to his presence, not just strength, but a solidified unity. Shadow Ridge has been tested by steel, by poison, and by betrayal. His voice rang out, clear and strong. We have bled, we have grieved. But we have not broken, we stand. He paused, his gaze sweeping over every face. And today we are not just survivors, we are a family forged in the hottest fire. The threats from outside are ash, the rot from within is purged. Now we build. He then turned and extended his hand toward me. My breath caught. I walked to stand beside him on the steps, facing the pack, my pack. Their eyes were on me, no longer wary or pitying, but filled with a hard-earned respect. They had seen me on the wall in the healing cave, and they knew of the role I played in uncovering the tunnel. This is Alara, Kieran said, his voice resonating with a pride that made my heart ache. She came to us an outcast. She has become our shield, our healer, and our heart. She is the strength I did not know I needed, and the compassion this pack must never lose. He looked at me, and in his golden eyes I saw not just the alpha, but the man Kieran, who carried the world and had chosen to share its weight with me. She is my Luna, and she is yours. Will you follow her as you follow me? The response was not a shouted cheer, but something deeper. A ripple went through the crowd. Warriors, she-wolves, elders, even the recovered Ashwind survivors, they all bowed their heads, not in fear, in allegiance, in acceptance, a silent, powerful vow. That night the great hearth in the main den was lit not for warmth alone, but for celebration. There was food, quiet talk, even the rare sound of laughter. The shadow of fear had lifted. Elian, pale but smiling, sat in his mother's lap. Nara nodded to me from across the fire, her eyes bright. I stood at the entrance, looking out at the peaceful yard, at the stars beginning to pierce the velvet sky above the mountains. The silence now was not the crushing silence of rejection. It was the peaceful, earned silence of a safe home. Kieran came to stand beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. "You are quiet," he observed. "I was thinking," I said softly, "about the girl who stood in a clearing 5 times, hearing only silence. I thought her story ended there in shame, but it was only the first page, a painful, necessary page that led here." I looked up at him, to a home, to a purpose, to you. He turned to face me fully. In the firelight, his fierce features were softened. He reached out, his calloused fingers tracing the line of my jaw with a reverence that stole my breath. "The moon goddess writes in mysterious ways," he murmured. "She led a lost, courageous heart to a king who only knew how to rule with stone and fire, and showed him how to build with something stronger." His hand slid to cradle the back of my neck, his forehead resting gently against mine. It was an intimacy deeper than any kiss, a merging of spirits. "You are my match, Alara, not because I claimed you, but because you chose to stay. You chose to fight. You chose to lead beside me." Tears not of sorrow, but of a profound, healing joy welled in my eyes. "I choose it still," I whispered, "today and every day after." He pulled me into an embrace then, strong and sure, a shelter I was no longer afraid to lean into. I was not a prisoner in a gilded cage. I was a queen in a fortress of belonging. The rejected she-wolf was a memory. The feared alpha was a partner. Together, we were the guardians of Shadow Ridge, a kingdom of outcasts who had finally, fiercely, found their place in the world. And as the mountain stood silent watch under the moon, its echoes finally still, I knew our story was not one of ending, but of a glorious, hard-won beginning. They called her unclaimed. They called her worthless. They cast her out into the wilderness to die. But the silence that broke her was only the beginning of her true power. Ilara endured 5 years of rejection, the final, crushing silence declaring her an outcast from her own pack and family. With nothing but a broken heart and a will to survive, she fled into the most dangerous woods known to wolf kind. There she wasn't found by deaths but by him. Kieran, the stone-hearted alpha, the feared king of the outcast pack at Shadow Ridge. He didn't see a weak, unclaimed she-wolf. He saw a fire that refused to be extinguished. He saw a Luna, but his claim is a double-edged sword. Plunged into a fortress of stone and suspicion, Ilara must navigate a pack that views her as a weakness, a target for traitors, and a magnet for war. When a brutal enemy lays siege to their walls and a hidden poison threatens from within, Ilara will discover that the strength to lead isn't given, it's forged in fire, betrayal, and the courage to protect the family you choose. This is a complete, halal-friendly story of redemption, fierce loyalty, and the unexpected love that blooms in the shadow of fear. No spice, only suspense and soul. Like, subscribe, and press the bell icon.